Welcome to the podcast, Nancy. We're going to have this beautiful conversation, and I just want to shout out that she's also one of my most amazing clients that I've learned a lot from. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. And I'm excited to be here.
So your podcast just celebrated a year not that long ago, which I'm so
Yes.
excited about because more than 85% of podcasters fall off after 7 to 8 episodes. And I want to first just shout out, like, way to go. You made it a year. You dropped an episode every week. You were consistent, but I know it couldn't have been easy, especially because you're not just a podcast host. You have a co-hosted show. So that's a whole nother level that we've never talked about on the show. So congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty surprising because we started it really, and I do my podcast. I wrote a book. It's called Unmute Yourself and Speak Up to Stand Out. And my editor and I became very friendly. And one day I called her and I said, I'm going to ask you something and I want you to think about it before you answer me. She said, okay. And I said, what do you think about doing a podcast? Because we share like similar views on things and we also disagree on things. But, I like her style. I like her tone. I like how she shows up just from working with her on the book. And she said, yeah, let's try it. So we really were like, let's try it. We started it on Zoom and didn't have a producer and did it ourselves and got our own little music and did our intro, and it's been amazing. And I had heard that. I'm actually glad you told me that 85% stop after 7 or 8. I had heard 6, that 6 was the magic number. And I remember thinking to myself, all right, so we'll do 6 and see what happens. And now we're at, like, I don't know, over 70. And I don't know if you just forgot, but we were top 25% on Spotify last year. So that's kind of important, I think.
That's kind of very important. I didn't forget. I just like when my guests like get to toot their own horn sometimes,
I
because
will toot
sometimes
that
saying
horn.
it
Yeah.
is more powerful than me just like reading someone's bio. I love when people are like, no, I did this, claim this.
So I have to tell you how this happened. So I'll never forget where I was. I was at the airport. Ooh, I forget where I was. I was in some airport somewhere, Tampa, I don't know, whatever. And we were doing it, as I said, through Spotify. And Spotify sends you this thing at the end of the year that says, hey, Nancy, happy holidays. Here was your year, like your year in review. And it said top 25% in your category. And my category is careers. So that's a pretty big category. I'm
Huge.
like, what? I'm like, this must be a mistake. And then I kept clicking through and it wasn't. And it blew my mind. The other thing that blew my mind was, again, because you can find this out, we're now in 41 countries. And I remember when we were excited when we were streaming in 4 countries. So what this means to me is that this message that I get sick of, I'll be honest, I get sick of the message because I say it all day long, every day. Sometimes I'm like, oh my God, if I have to tell the story one more time, or like, what am I even going to talk about? Like, I'm sick of hearing my own voice. 41 countries. It's amazing. So all of this is to say that what got us through was that we knew that people were listening and we knew that it was resonating because we kept getting more and more listeners and more countries and more feedback. And plus it's a blast. Super fun, by the way, super fun, which I know everybody knows.
Right? We all got into podcasting because it was fun, but then we got some of the back end stuff that wasn't fun. But I want to go back to this moment of like that resonation thing, because I think this is where a lot of us get stuck. We get in that place where it's like, if I have to say the same damn thing one more time, I am going to lose my ever loving mind.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't know who's on the other end. I've had so many stories that people have reached out like, this touched my life in this way, and I'm like, I was talking about podcasting, how did that? But you never know who's listening. In 41 countries, top 25%, like, you are going out and making this happen, and it's because you're willing to keep showing up.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key. Yeah, that's the key. And there have been plenty of weeks where I'm like, oh God, I really don't want to get on. Like, and there've been just a few where I've said my energy was really flat. I'm not putting that out just because There's been plenty that I've said things I wish I hadn't said. Those get published anyway. But the ones that where I'm really flat or it's not good, I'll pull them because I don't want people to be like, what was she even talking about? Anyway, my point is I've had old friends I haven't talked to for years text me or message me out of the blue and say, I loved this. I have one friend that said, I listen to you every week. I haven't talked to her in forever. I was in town hall in my small town here and someone said, oh yeah, I heard you say that on your podcast. I'm like, what? Like cause I don't know who's listening. It's super wild. It's just wild. And nothing brings me more joy than when somebody says, yeah, I use this. I heard you and I used this and I did the thing or whatever the case may be. It's incredibly rewarding. I love it. I love it.
And I love that you have that evidence file of like, this is why it's rewarding. This is why I show up. I will show up with my 100%. And I think that one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you do have a co-host, what happens when you have a co-hosted show and one of you is on fire and the other one of you, like, how do you manage that? Because I know there's a bunch of people in my audience. I've thought about bringing on a co-host, but I've always been worried about, well, what about the other person? Like, how do you worry about two people? Worrying about one and a guest is like enough for me.
Yep. Sorry, I was taking a sip, which we all know is the bane of podcasters' existence. So I will if I feel that my co-host energy is flat or if I feel like she's phoning it in, I'll stop the podcast and say, was everything okay? Or whatever. Or you don't really seem to be into this topic. Do you want to just record something else? There's usually a reason. And it doesn't happen very often. And the same with me. Like, as I said, I was in a mood one day and it was just not a great one. And she's like, you sure you want to publish that? And I'm like, no, we can't publish this one. And as a matter of fact, let's burn and erase the tape because I was just going off. And if anyone heard it, I'm sure they wouldn't be amused. So I just think it's a mutual commitment. And every now and then we get together and say, how are you feeling about things? And I want to make sure I have a very strong personality and I want to make sure that I'm not bulldozing her. And she, I'm sure, wants to make sure that I'm still finding value with her and vice versa. And we just touch base every now and then. It's interesting because I also ask the people who listen and I say, what would you think would happen if there was just one of us? And almost everyone says, you guys have a great energy. And when you banter, it's really helpful because she brings an incredibly unique perspective that I can't. And people value that. I'm not the one that got to top 25% in 41 countries. Together we did. And that's what I need to remember.
Yeah. And I think that goes with anybody, like the host or like if you're a solo show or the other is it's about that communication and that energy you show up with and asking your audience. So many of us, me included, don't ask our audience enough. And I know from your show, that's one thing that you guys do every time. Mm-hmm. Here's an action step and connect with us.
Yep. Yeah. I want to hear what's resonating and what's not. I had one person, she heard I've had a few. So some of my clients, so I'm a public speaker. That's my day job is I'm a keynote speaker. One of my clients, we're going to do a live broadcast from stage. We're going to do a live podcast broadcast from stage. That'll be super fun for Jen to try to figure out, but we're hoping that it'll be okay. I have another client who wants to work my podcasts into ongoing curriculum for a training program. I have another client who, wait a minute, that was one. I'm trying to think of the other one who, it was a discovery call. And she said, I'm addicted to your podcast. And I was like, oh, I'm embarrassed. And she said, why? And at the time we didn't have a producer. So I thought it was Mickey Mouse. And I thought, well, we did our own intro and all this other stuff. They could care less. They don't care. And she said, I loved this one. I love this one. So there's all these people everywhere that I have no idea who they are. And they're religiously listening. It's wild. I mean, talk about a way to spread your message. You're putting your message into the universe for anyone who has any kind of electronic device where they can listen to a podcast will find you. And your ideal client or the person that needs to hear the message, they will find you 100%, 100%.
Oh yeah. And that's what I always remind people. I'm like, you might not have like the big numbers of the big shows, but those people are coming back every week to listen
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
every episode. And I'm like, think about if you were to show up on stage, like you reminded, like working with you is reminding me, like, if I had this many people show up in front of me on a stage, I might pee my pants. Like, that's pretty cool that, that many people come up and you don't know who they are, but you're making an impact.
Yeah.
And they show
Yeah.
up to your talks every week.
It's wild. It's great. It's really great. And again, to hear one person, an old friend of mine said, again, this is the person I hadn't talked to in years. She sent me a text and she said, no, I think it was on the phone. She said, I alternate between you and Jay Shetty. And I was blown. Never in a million years would I put Nancy Medoff and Jay Shetty in the same sentence. And then I thought to myself, well, why not? Why not? Jay, I'm coming for you. So it's I think you're doing people a disservice if you don't get your message out there. It needs to be heard. And there's no easier way to get it heard than a podcast.
And that's why you wrote the book, Unmute Yourself. That's why your podcast is called Unmute Yourself. And I love that you have like the message that's like, okay, build a bigger table. Like you want to help people unmute themselves. And that's what you hear. So you hear a lot of people saying like, speak up, speak up. But you never hear the people say like your final tagline is, and build a bigger table so that more people can come. And I think that's what makes you resonate with me so much is it's not just you speaking out. You're speaking out because you want more people to come with you to your party or
Yes,
whatever it is at your
yes,
table.
yes, yes. And there's actually two expressions that stick with me. One is throw the rope down, right? Like once you're climbing the ladder or whatever, you throw the rope down. And the other one is amplify. It's actually a term, and it's used mostly with women, but also with men. I want to amplify women everywhere. And that this is nothing against the men. This is women who aren't getting their seat at the table. So it is my job. It is no longer optional. When you are at that table, whatever that table is, it's you have to pull a chair up and bring someone with you. You have to. You have to. It's your duty and it's your job and it's not optional. So what other way than to get this message out to millions of people? I'm only kidding. My podcast isn't that big, but to 41 countries. Yeah, to 41 countries. So it's awesome. I love it. I can't say enough good things about it. But it's
Like,
not always easy either. It's not always easy.
and I'm glad you said yet. It's not that big yet.
Yet.
Like, can we go back
Yet.
and say yet one more time? Because it will get there. And as long as you keep showing up. So for somebody that is struggling with pod fade right now, what would be the ingredient or ingredients that you would want to add to the cure so that people would keep wanting to move forward?
It's not going to be very sexy. I'm going to tell you right now.
Perfect.
It's discipline. It's discipline. If I only did it when I wanted to do it, it wouldn't be successful. And if you only did whatever it is you do when you wanted to do it, you wouldn't be successful. You have to do it even when you don't want to do it. And know that even on those days when you're like the last thing you want to do is get in front of a microphone and record, there's still going to be a nugget in there that's going to make a really big difference to one of your listeners. So it's the discipline. You just got to do it.
I love that. It's all about the discipline. And I have to know, just because I know this is totally out of left field, but I like to do this to my guests sometimes, is what was your favorite episode that you recorded on your show?
Oh,
And why?
my favorite episode, you probably won't be surprised, was that was her episode. Nope. I was a guest on someone's podcast. My favorite episode.
That's fine. You can share the one that you were a guest on too, but I want to know on your show also.
Okay, so the one that I was a guest on was Tiffany Carter. For those of you who might not know her, she's a multi-million-dollar entrepreneur, top 1% podcaster.
0.05.
Oh,
0.05.
for the love of God. 0.05.
Yeah,
Wow.
she's in the top 0.5%.
I mean, she's amazing, but we know that. So she had me on her podcast and I took her through an exercise that I do. It's called Own Your Why. And it's an exercise that I do with one-on-one clients and that I'm doing in a retreat coming up, where you really peel back the why behind what you do. And there is no surface answer here. You ask yourself the same thing 5 times. And I don't recommend people do it on their own because it's so uncomfortable, you probably won't finish it, or you'll give yourself a bullshit answer that someone else might call you out on. And it was impromptu. I did it with her and we were both shook at the end of it. Shook. In fact, I did it with Jen and we were both shook at the end of it. So this why becomes your true north. And that's your why is what will see you through when you don't have the discipline or the motivation. So my favorite episode, it's interesting because my favorite episode is not the most popular episode. My favorite episode is probably debunking imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome, while I believe it exists, right? There are times when people feel like imposters. There are times when I feel like an imposter. So first of all, imposter syndrome is not unique to women. Men experience self-doubt, anxiety, all of it as well. It's when you catastrophize it and you use it as an excuse for not showing up or an excuse to not do the thing. And when people it's a feeling and feelings aren't facts. And when people hear that, they stop limiting themselves. And we've done I think 2 iterations of that podcast because it's total bullshit. And we need to stop saying it. It's not a syndrome. You are not sick. You do not have a medical condition. You're having a feeling. You are unsure and uncertain. And everybody is unsure, uncertain. So now that we know that it's a feeling, let's deal with the feeling. So that is my favorite episode by far.
And that really ties into the cure for pod fade too, because I think that starts to come in to podcasters all the time, is that feeling of being an imposter, whether it's you're starting to see growth or you're not starting to see growth. We can fall into those feelings, and those feelings that aren't fact can really blow things up real fast.
It's ridiculous. It's limiting beliefs and you're limiting your own success. I'm sorry. It's not ridiculous. That wasn't nice. It's fascinating to me how many people I know, particularly small business owners, particularly people who are listening to this podcast, who get imposter syndrome or imposter feeling. And they're like, well, who am I to have a podcast? I'm not an expert. What do I know? You're feeling self-doubt. So if you're feeling self-doubt, let's address the self-doubt. Let's not wrap it up in a bow and call it a syndrome and then not do the thing. So that's why it's my favorite episode.
And I love that. And your show really goes through a lot of topics like that. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. And you just did one on tall poppy syndrome. And I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing, but I see how that shows up in my life. So you guys all have to run over to the Unmute Yourself podcast, because Nancy and Beth drop magical bombs that are just going to blow your mind every week. And I'm not just saying that because she's my client. It's actually I've learned a lot. And like I said in the beginning, since meeting you, my life has already changed leaps and bounds just by being in your space.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Mine too, but thank you. That's awesome. I love that.
So is there anything else that you want to leave the listeners with? Although you've given us so many mic drop moments already.
Yeah, I will say that if you're at the point where you think you're either going to double down or stop doing it, right? Just keep doing it. Just keep doing it. Keep doing it until if you're questioning whether or not you should keep doing it, keep doing it. It's when there's no question in your mind. If there's no question in your mind, I'm done with this, then you're done with it. But there were so many times that we were going to stop. And I'm so glad that we didn't stop doing it. I'm so glad, because it's super fun. Sometimes it's a pain in the ass, but it's super fun and it gets the message out. And that's the key, is getting the message out. So I would say keep at it until you get your mojo back. That's what I would say.
Well, yes, keep at it. And I will be firm behind her, that, because again, I want this show to be the cure for pod fade. I want this mission for this brand to be your cure, because it's such a powerful platform to get your message out. And that message will hit other people's lives. And not only that, but it's so healing for the person who's speaking on the mic too.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the other thing too. It's like therapy for me. I'm like, I get it. If I'm torqued up about something, I talk about it on the podcast. It's great. It's really great. It's great. It's great.
Yeah. I actually did a secret podcast where I disguised my name so that I could talk about all the things that I didn't want to have the feedback. So I put a fake name, voice changer. I talked about politics. I talked about the whole COVID thing, all the rabbit holes I went down. And as soon as I did it, I wasn't sick anymore. I was like, it magically released out. I was so popular. It was terribly popular, which was
Is it
scary.
is it in your podcast?
No, it's a separate podcast under a
Oh,
fake name with a fake everything. I created I mean, like, there's email accounts for, like, it was so healing for me to be able to share
yeah.
where I didn't have to absorb the negative
Filter it.
feedback.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
I,
That's
I,
great. That's
I
awesome.
recommend and don't recommend.
Yeah, I might have to do one of those. Yeah, that's great. That's great.
But
Awesome.
thank you so much for sharing with us. And I hope everyone hops over to the Unmute Yourself podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Dun, 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 dun.